My father called me a liability in front of 63 people. He did it with a champagne glass raised high, smiling like he was delivering a compliment. The room didn't laugh. That's how I knew something had shifted. My name is Caroline Whitaker. I was 28 the night my father decided to make my engagement party his stage. What he didn't know was that 3 months earlier, I had found something in his financial records that he never meant for anyone to see. But this doesn't start at the party. It starts with a spreadsheet. My father, Thomas Whitaker, built Whitaker Development from a single duplex renovation into one of the largest mid-sized commercial contractors in our county. By the time I was 10, people lowered their voices when he walked into rooms. He wasn't loud. He didn't have to be. His authority came from certainty. And certainty, when you grow up inside it, feels like gravity. He never hit. He never screamed. He simply corrected. When I brought home a perfect report card in 5th grade, he glanced at it once and said, "Consistency matters more than flukes." It took me years to realize he had never once used the word proud in private, only in public, in front of clients, in front of donors, in front of men whose opinions carried leverage. I learned early that my value increased in proportion to who was watching. At 12, I won a regional debate competition. He stood on stage during the awards ceremony, arm around my shoulder, and told the audience I had inherited his mind. In the car ride home, he asked why I had stumbled during cross-examination. The system was simple. He shined in public. I absorbed in private. I went into accounting because numbers didn't shift depending on tone. They didn't reinterpret themselves based on audience. I earned my CPA at 24, then specialized in forensic auditing, fraud analysis, financial tracing, the kind of work that uncovers what people hide. My father joked at a dinner once, "Careful what you do around Caroline. She'll audit you." Everyone laughed. I smiled. He didn't know how close that joke would come to landing. I met Daniel Hart at a compliance conference in Chicago. He was a litigation attorney who handled white-collar defense. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened more than he spoke. When I told a story about my father roasting me at Thanksgiving for overthinking everything, Daniel didn't laugh. He said, "That's not normal." The first crack in a lifelong narrative is rarely loud. It's quiet, just enough light to see something differently. We dated for 18 months before he proposed. He did it in our kitchen, no audience, no spectacle, just a ring and a steady voice. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We wanted a small engagement dinner. Immediate family, close friends. My father had other ideas. "I've already booked the Hanover room," he told me on the phone. You don't celebrate milestones in backyards. The Hanover room was where he hosted investor receptions. 70-person capacity, full AV setup, valet parking. "This is ours," I said carefully. "And I'm paying for it," he replied. "Let me do this." My mother called 15 minutes later. Just let him feel included. That word again, included, as though my engagement required his management. I agreed. That was my mistake. 3 months before the party, I was working late on a commercial audit. A mid-level property management firm flagged for unusual expense reallocations. I traced payments through 2 LLCs, then 3. One of them shared a registered agent with an entity I recognized, Whitaker Holdings, my father's private subsidiary. My pulse didn't change. Training overrides emotion. I pulled public filings, cross-referenced wire transfers. Then I saw it. Recurring payments from a joint venture account labeled Whitaker and Lyle Developments, his business partner. Michael Lyle, 15 years of partnership. Friends before that. The transfers were small enough to avoid automatic compliance triggers, but steady, monthly, consistent. I documented everything. Over 6 weeks, I built a file, not emotionally, clinically, amounts, dates, destination accounts. The total, once calculated, made me sit back in my chair. $912,400, diverted over 11 years, structured, intentional. There are moments in forensic accounting when you know exactly what you're looking at. This was one. I closed the office door that night and sat in silence. The daughter in me searched for error. The auditor in me found none. I told Daniel 2 days later. We sat at our dining table with the documents spread out between us. He read slowly. Carefully, he didn't react until the end. "Is there another explanation?" he asked. "I've tried to find one." "And there is." He leaned back. "What do you want to do?" "After the engagement party," I said, "I'll bring this to Michael directly, quietly." He nodded. "That's fair." He didn't push, he didn't inflame. He simply said, "Just don't wait too long." The week of the party, the guest list expanded, from 22 to 63. Country club members, developers, investors, 2 councilmen. My closest friends were placed at table 7 near the kitchen entrance. Michael Lyle and his wife were seated at table 1, front and center. Networking opportunity, my father called it. It felt more like staging. The night of the party, the Hanover room gleamed. Candles, projected slideshow, family photos curated by my father. Images of vacations, graduations, public smiles. He greeted guests at the entrance like a host at his own gala. "There's my girl," he said loudly when I walked in. He hugged me, held it too long. "You look stunning." He had never used that word in private. Michael Lyle shook my hand warmly. "Your father's been bragging all week." I forced a smile. Of course he had. Dinner unfolded predictably. Stories about my childhood mistakes disguised as humor. The time she nearly failed calculus. I thought she'd switch majors 5 times. Polite laughter. Daniel's hand steady against mine. I endured. I had endured worse. Then dessert plates cleared. My father stood, tapped his glass. The room quieted. "I'd like to say a few words about my daughter." My stomach tightened. He began lightly. Childhood anecdotes, academic struggles. Then he shifted. "I'll admit, there were moments I wondered if Caroline would ever find someone patient enough to manage her intensity." A few uncomfortable laughs. Daniel went still beside me. My father smiled wider. "So tonight, I'd like to toast the man brave enough to take her on." Silence, heavy, not amused, just still. My father mistook it for anticipation. He raised his glass higher. "To my daughter, who finally found a man willing to do the hard work." No one laughed. Not Michael, not the councilmen, not even the country club wives. 63 witnesses absorbing something ugly in real time. Daniel's chair shifted slightly. I placed my hand on his forearm. "Don't." I stood. "Sit down, Dad." He blinked. "Caroline, don't be dramatic." I said sit down. The tone surprised even me. Controlled, measured, he sat. For the first time in my life, he obeyed. I walked to the projector table, unzipped my bag, opened my laptop. The screen lit the wall. The folder name appeared. Archive L. I turned to face the room. "My father just made a joke about my character," I said evenly. "I think it's fair the room understands his." And I opened the file. The first slide was clean. White background, black header. Forensic review summary, Whitaker and Lyle developments. No dramatic title. No accusation in bold, just structure. I didn't look at my father. I looked at Michael Lyle. "Over the past 11 years, I said, voice steady, recurring transfers were made from the joint venture operating account into a series of layered LLCs. I traced them." The room didn't murmur, it didn't gasp, it simply listened. That was worse. I clicked to the next slide. Columns filled the screen. Dates, amounts, destination entities. I let the silence sit long enough for recognition to form. Michael slowly removed his glasses. My father stood abruptly. "This is absurd," he said, louder than he intended. His public voice was fracturing. "Caroline, you have no idea what you're looking at." I turned toward him. "I do this for a living." I didn't raise my volume. I didn't need to. The projector light cast the spreadsheet across his jacket. The numbers reflected off him like evidence already attached. "It's restructuring," he said quickly. "Tax optimization, internal shifts." I clicked again. Flowchart, layered entities. Shell accounts tied through a shared registered agent. "Then why," I asked calmly, "were the transfers broken into sub-threshold increments every month?" Michael's wife leaned forward. Michael didn't move. My father shifted tactics. This is private business. It has nothing to do with this party. Correct, I said. It should have been handled privately. I plan to. I let that land. I intended to bring this to Michael on Monday. A flicker crossed my father's face. He hadn't known that. But since my character was placed on display, I continued, I think transparency applies both ways. Michael stood slowly, not angrily, carefully. How much? He asked. I clicked to the summary page. Based on what I could trace without full ledger access, $912,400. Someone at table 5 exhaled sharply. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. My father stepped toward him. Mike, this is being twisted. She's emotional. I didn't flinch. Emotion doesn't produce bank records. The room shifted. Not physically, energetically. Authority had left my father's side. It had moved to data, to documentation, to quiet certainty. Michael looked at my father. Is it true? That question mattered more than any slide. My father hesitated, just long enough. I'll explain everything, he said. That wasn't my question. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was clarifying. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Ray, he said when the line connected, I need you at the office Monday. Full audit. He ended the call without another word. My father's composure cracked visibly. Caroline, you've embarrassed this family. I met his eyes. No, you did. He looked around the room as if expecting support. There was none. The country club men stared into their plates. The councilmen avoided eye contact. Investors leaned toward their spouses, whispering. Daniel stepped up beside me. He didn't speak. His presence alone was enough. My father's final move was predictable. Linda, he said, turning toward my mother, tell them she's misinterpreting this. My mother looked down at her folded hands. 30 years of silence rested there. Then she looked up. Thomas, she said softly, I don't think she is. The shift was seismic, not loud, but permanent. My father's jaw tightened. You're choosing her over me. No, my mother replied quietly. I'm choosing truth. That was the first time in my life she had not protected him. Guests began standing, not dramatically, deliberately. Coats collected, valet tickets retrieved. No one shook my father's hand on the way out. Michael and his wife approached me before leaving. He looked older in 10 minutes than he had in 15 years. Thank you, he said simply. I'm sorry it had to be this way, I replied. He nodded once. It already was this way. That sentence stayed with me. He left without another word to my father. The projector still glowed. The audit summary remained on the wall. My father stared at it like it might disappear if he waited long enough. The room emptied. Within 20 minutes, the Hanover room was nearly silent. Candles flickered over untouched dessert plates. My father stood near the bar, whiskey in hand, not drinking. You just destroyed everything I built, he said. I closed my laptop slowly. No, I said. You did. His shoulders sagged slightly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. You could have come to me, he said. I tried for 28 years, I replied. That ended the conversation. Daniel handed me my coat. We walked out together. The night air was cool, clean, unburdened. Inside the Hanover room, the stage lights dimmed. And for the first time in my life, my father was standing in a room he could not control. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. No headlines, no reporters, no public spectacle. Just a conference room on the 12th floor of Whitaker and Lyle Developments and a court-ordered audit notice sitting on the polished oak table. Michael Lyle moved quickly. That surprised me. For years, he had deferred to my father in meetings. I'd seen it growing up, Thomas leading presentations, while Michael nodded, added commentary, smoothed tension. But betrayal recalibrates hierarchy. By 8:15 a.m., an independent forensic firm had been retained. Access to company accounts was restricted. Dual authorization protocols were reinstated on all transfers. My father's administrative privileges were suspended pending review. It happened quietly, efficiently, just like fraud is built. He called me 6 times before noon. I didn't answer. The 7th call went to voicemail. Caroline, this is spiraling because of you. Call me back immediately. The word immediately carried the same tone. It always had command disguised as urgency. I deleted it. Daniel looked up from his laptop across the dining table. You okay? Yes. It wasn't anger I felt, it was finality. By Wednesday, 3 subcontractors had requested contract reviews. Not accusations, precautions, trust erodes in concentric circles. If funds were misdirected internally, what else had shifted? The country club board convened Thursday night. Membership suspended pending legal outcome. The following week, permanently revoked. 22 years of dues and donor plaques. Gone, the irony didn't escape me. My father once told me reputation was everything. He hadn't realized how fragile it actually was. The independent audit took 5 weeks. I stayed out of it deliberately. My report had triggered the process. That was enough. I returned to my work. Client fraud cases, internal reviews, professional distance. The numbers in other people's spreadsheets felt strangely lighter. The worst-case scenario had already occurred in my own family. Everything else felt procedural. My mother called the second Sunday after the party. She never called on Sundays. That had always been his day. Can we meet? She asked. We met at a small cafe halfway between her house and mine, neutral ground. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, unanchored. I should have said something sooner, she began, about the money. About everything. Her hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. I knew he moved funds sometimes. He'd get tense when Michael asked questions. I didn't know how much. That mattered, not innocence, not guilt, just acknowledgement. I thought staying quiet kept peace, she continued. But I think it just postponed consequences. That's usually what silence does, I said. She nodded. I'm seeing a therapist. The sentence felt foreign in her mouth. That's good. I don't want to lose you. You didn't, I replied carefully, but we can't pretend nothing happened. I'm not. That was new. My mother had spent 30 years pretending. 3 weeks later, the independent audit report was finalized. $964,200, higher than my estimate, layered through 5 entities. Documented misrepresentation in internal financial summaries. Michael filed a civil complaint within 48 hours, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conversion of partnership assets. The language was clinical, precise, unforgiving. Criminal referral was discussed but ultimately set aside in exchange for full financial restitution negotiations. Public scandal would damage too many employees. Michael chose preservation over spectacle. That decision told me everything about the difference between the two men. My father came to my office unannounced one Thursday afternoon. He had never visited before. He sat across from me in a conference room, posture rigid. You humiliated me, he said. I presented facts. You could have warned me. I did, I replied quietly, by choosing Monday. He looked confused. If you hadn't insulted me publicly, this would have stayed private. His jaw tightened. So this is revenge. No, I said evenly, it's consequence. The distinction frustrated him. He had always equated resistance with rebellion. Never with boundary. You've sided with outsiders over your own father. I let the silence stretch. Michael isn't an outsider, I said. He was your partner. He leaned back. For the first time, he didn't have a counterargument ready. The certainty that once defined him was thinning. Negotiations dragged through early spring. Assets liquidated, the lake house listed, boats sold, investment accounts restructured to cover restitution. He avoided jail, but he did not avoid exposure. Whitaker and Lyle rebranded without his name. Whitaker Development dissolved formally in June. The sign outside the office was replaced within a week. I drove past once. I didn't stop. The hardest shift wasn't financial. It was personal. For decades, my father controlled narratives. Now he couldn't. When acquaintances asked about the party, he said little. There were accounting disagreements. No one pressed further. They didn't need to. They had been there. 63 witnesses. Stories travel, but documentation travels faster. Daniel and I moved our wedding to a small garden venue. 30 guests, no investors, no country club acquaintances, just people who knew us. The guest list was written by us. For the first time in my life, I experienced an event that didn't orbit my father's gravity. He wasn't invited. My mother attended. She stood quietly during the ceremony. When I said my vows, Daniel squeezed my hands gently. No one raised a glass to diminish me. No one positioned me as a punchline. The air felt different, unmanaged. 3 months after the party, I received one final message from my father. You chose strangers over blood. I read it twice. Then I understood something with clarity that surprised me. He still believed loyalty meant silence. He still believed blood required protection. Even when protection shielded harm, I deleted the message, not in anger, in recognition. Restitution negotiations concluded in late summer. He agreed to structured repayment terms and relinquished all equity in the joint venture. Michael did not celebrate. He simply rebuilt. That's what stable people do. They repair, they don't perform collapse. One evening in September, my mother invited me to her sister's house. She had moved out. Temporarily, she said. I didn't ask for specifics. She was beginning to build something separate. Slowly. I don't know who I am without him, she admitted over tea. That's something you get to find out, I replied. Her eyes filled. Not dramatically. Just honestly, I don't feel victorious. That surprises people. They expect triumph. They expect relief. What I feel is quieter. Alignment, the moment where your internal compass and your external action finally match. The fraud mattered, but what mattered more was refusing to swallow another public diminishment. The audit didn't destroy my father, it revealed him. And revelation, once public, can't be folded back into silence. The lawsuit didn't go to trial. That was the first quiet surprise. Michael's attorney pushed for a civil resolution with structured restitution, asset surrender, and permanent removal from the company. Criminal referral remained an option, but Michael declined it. He built part of this, Michael told Daniel in a brief hallway conversation outside mediation. I won't erase him, but I won't protect him either. That sentence stayed with me. It was the difference between punishment and accountability. Punishment destroys, accountability restructures. My father had never understood the difference. By late autumn, Whitaker and Lyle Developments no longer carried his name. The new signage read, Lyle Development Group. Clean. Simple, no embellishment. My father's office was cleared out in a single afternoon. I heard from an old receptionist that he stood in the doorway while a junior associate boxed his plaques and framed awards. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He watched. That image unsettled me more than anger would have. Power leaving a person rarely looks dramatic. It looks hollow. The lake house sold in December, below asking. The boat went the week after. Country club membership was not reinstated. Investors who once called weekly now avoided eye contact in grocery store aisles. Reputation, once inflated by constant performance, deflates quickly when trust fractures. It doesn't explode, it leaks. Slowly, irreversibly. He called me once in January, not angry, not commanding, just tired. Caroline, he said, and for the first time, my name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Do you hate me? I didn't answer immediately. Hatred requires heat. What I felt wasn't heat, it was distance. No, I said. I don't hate you. He exhaled audibly. Then why did you do it? I didn't do anything, I replied evenly. I stopped protecting what shouldn't have been protected. He was quiet. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed me first, I said, for years. There was no shouting, just two adults finally speaking without an audience. I thought it made you stronger, he said after a moment. The statement stunned me. You thought humiliation was strength. I thought resilience required pressure. That's not resilience, I said softly. That's endurance. Silence again, he had no rebuttal. For a man who built his identity on certainty, uncertainty was suffocating. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. That sentence might have changed everything 10 years ago. Now it felt late. You start by not rewriting it, I said. Don't call it a misunderstanding. Don't call it business complexity. Call it what it was. And what was it? Fraud, I said, and control. The words didn't shake when I said them. That was new. My mother filed for separation in February. Quietly, no press, no dramatic confrontation. She moved into a small townhouse with pale walls and second-hand furniture she chose herself. The first time I visited, she asked my opinion on where to hang a painting. It was a small question, but it wasn't filtered through anyone else's approval. That mattered. I don't know who I am without him, she told me one afternoon. You'll find out, I said. She nodded. I'm learning to say what I think, she added. How does it feel? Uncomfortable, she admitted. But clean. Clean, that was the right word, truth scrapes, but it leaves surfaces honest. Daniel and I married in late spring, 31 guests, garden venue, no microphones for speeches unless requested. Michael attended. He hugged me before the ceremony. Your numbers saved me, he said quietly. They were always yours, I replied. My mother sat in the front row. She cried during the vows, not loudly, not theatrically, just softly. My father was not invited, not out of revenge, out of boundary. Some rooms require safety, not reconciliation. People sometimes assume the hardest part was projecting the audit. It was. The hardest part was what came after, living with the knowledge that exposing the truth fractures families permanently. There is no reset button, no rewind, just forward. I mourned the version of my father I had invented, the one who taught me to ride a bike and meant it, the one who would have said proud without calculating who was listening. That man never existed. But the grief was real anyway. Grief doesn't require reality, it requires attachment. In early summer, I ran into him at a hardware store. Random, unplanned. He looked older, not dramatically, but worn. We stood in aisle 12 between paint samples and light fixtures. How are you? He asked. I'm okay. He nodded. I heard the wedding was nice. It was. I hope you were happy. I was. There was nothing hostile in the exchange, just distance. He started to say something else, stopped, then nodded once and walked away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small watching him leave. I felt level. That was the shift. The lawsuit settled formally in July. Structured repayments, equity forfeiture, non-compete clauses. No prison, no headlines, just documented accountability. He would spend years repairing what he siphoned, and perhaps longer repairing what he damaged. The family dynamic changed permanently. Extended relatives stopped asking me to smooth things over. They no longer framed confrontation as disrespect. Something about seeing documentation projected publicly removes ambiguity. Facts don't argue, they anchor. My mother's siblings became more present. They had always known something was off. They just didn't know the scale. Now they did, and silence was no longer required. One evening in late August, my mother and I sat on her townhouse balcony, sun setting, city noise faint below. I was afraid of losing him, she said, and now. I lost him anyway, she replied quietly. But I didn't lose you. That sentence was worth more than any restitution check. I don't pretend this is a triumph story. It is. It's a correction story, a recalibration of power. For 28 years, my father controlled narrative, room, and tone. In one evening, the narrative shifted to documentation. Control moved to transparency. Tone moved to calm. That's the real reversal, not humiliation. Alignment. The last time my father tried to control a room, there were only 4 people in it. A mediator, his attorney, Michael, and him, no investors. No country club board members, no audience, just documents. He signed the settlement agreement without looking up. That's what Michael told me later. He didn't argue, Michael said. He just signed. That was the part that surprised me, not that he lost, that he didn't fight. For a man who once reshaped every conversation to his advantage, surrender came quietly. No speech, no final defense, just ink on paper. I expected relief when it ended. Instead, I felt something heavier. Not guilt, not regret, grief, not for the fraud, for the father I kept trying to build in my head. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from realizing the version of someone you loved never actually existed. You mourn an illusion, and illusions don't leave closure. They just dissolve. A few months after the settlement, I received a letter, not an email, not a text. Handwritten, the envelope was plain, no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single page, Caroline. I thought discipline made people strong. I thought pressure created excellence. I thought protecting the business protected the family. I was wrong about more than the money. I don't expect forgiveness. Dad. No excuses, no blame, no but. Just wrong. It was the first time he had used that word in relation to himself. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a keepsake, as documentation. Some truths deserve to exist physically. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to punish him, because I didn't know what response would be honest. Forgiveness, when forced, turns into performance, and I had performed enough in my life. Daniel and I bought a small house that winter, nothing extravagant, white siding, a porch swing, a kitchen big enough for 2 people to move without colliding. When we unpacked boxes, I found the flash drive containing the audit file. Archive, I held it for a moment. The weight of it surprised me. Such a small object. Such massive consequence. Daniel watched me from across the room. "You don't have to carry that forever," he said gently. "I know." I didn't throw it away. I archived it professionally. Encrypted. Filed. Closed, not destroyed, not displayed, just stored. Some chapters don't need to be erased. They just need to be contained. My mother finalized the divorce in early spring. No dramatic court battle, just paperwork. When she signed her name, she told me her hand shook. Not from fear, from unfamiliar freedom. "I kept waiting for someone to tell me I couldn't," she said. "No one can now," I replied. She smiled. It wasn't the practiced smile she used to wear, it was smaller. Real. Occasionally, I hear about my father. He consults privately now. Smaller projects, no partnerships, no joint ventures. People still respect his knowledge, but they no longer trust his oversight. Reputation doesn't disappear, it recalibrates. He is no longer the man who commands rooms. He is the man who once lost one. 6 months after our wedding, Daniel and I hosted a dinner. 10 people, no microphones, no staged toasts. Midway through the meal, one of our friends raised a glass. "To Caroline," she said, "for being brave." I almost corrected her. Brave implies fearlessness. I wasn't fearless. I was tired. Tired of shrinking, tired of absorbing, tired of smiling while being diminished. Courage often looks like exhaustion finally refusing to cooperate. Sometimes I still replay that night in the Hanover room. The tap of the glass. The toast, the silence, the click of the projector. But when I replay it now, I don't see humiliation, I see transition. A moment when the power dynamic inverted permanently. My father built his life on control. I built mine on evidence. Control depends on silence. Evidence depends on light. When the light turned on, control evaporated. Do I forgive him? I don't know. Forgiveness isn't a single event. It's a gradual erosion of resentment. Some days I feel close to it. Other days, I feel the old ache. But I no longer feel small, and that matters more than the label. The most important change wasn't financial. It wasn't legal. It was internal. For 28 years, I believed love required endurance. That loyalty meant silence. That strength meant absorbing impact without reaction. Now I understand something different. Love without respect is control. Loyalty without honesty is complicity. And strength without boundary is self-erasure. The last time I saw my father, it was at a distance. A community fundraiser. He stood near the back of the room. No spotlight, no microphone, he saw me, nodded once, I nodded back, no animosity, no reconciliation, just acknowledgement. We are 2 adults now, not a hierarchy, not a performance, just separate. That separation is painful, but it's honest. There's a version of this story where I stayed seated that night, where I laughed at the toast, where I swallowed the humiliation, where I waited until Monday and handled everything quietly. In that version, the fraud still comes out. But the pattern doesn't break. In that version, my father still believes he can diminish me publicly without consequence. In that version, I carry the silence longer. I'm glad I didn't choose that version. I didn't destroy my father. I ended a performance. and performances cannot survive documentation. My name is Caroline Whitaker. I was 28 when I stopped absorbing and started revealing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I projected a spreadsheet. And sometimes, that's all it takes.